Hello, welcome to this Retrieval Markets Workshop Intro to Saturn. We've got a great schedule lined up today. In the first block, we've got myself giving a presentation just to introduce today, and Juan Bennett, the founder and CEO of Protocol Labs, speaking about the wider vision and introducing the day too. There's been a slight change to the schedule in so much as I'm going to be starting off and Juan's going to be going next. Following a break, we'll then move on to two of the engineers working on the Saturn project to introduce it in more depth and go through some more of the technical details. In terms of the flavor of today, it's going to be quite a technical and architectural look at Saturn rather than anything sort of more product focused. And then, for anyone who's here in person, we've also got the added bonus of a workshop after the live stream's finished. So thanks for showing up in person. And with that, I will begin. So, Retrieval Markets Workshop, Intro to Saturn. I'm going to start off with the motivation of why we're talking about retrieval here at all. A lot of the events at Protocol Labs are focused around storage, but retrieval, in my opinion, is equally as important. So we'll look into why that is. We'll then talk about what a retrieval market is. These words are used in the title of today's workshop, but it's good just to get that definition sorted. We'll then look at the Filecoin retrieval market, why we need a Web3 retrieval market in the first place, and then I'll talk a bit about the Retrieval Market Working Group, which is a group of teams who are all working in this space. Okay, so some motivation. This statistic is taken from the cloud industry, and it goes that by 2025, the global content delivery network market is expected to be twice as large as the cloud object storage market. So for CDNs, think Akamai, Fastly, Cloudflare, CloudFront. For cloud object storage, think AWS S3. So we're saying that actually fetching your file from cloud services is a market twice as large as storing them in the first place. When I first saw this kind of surprised me. I kind of felt that whenever I stored stuff in cloud storage, the acceleration of that content in a CDN was like an added extra benefit. But actually, when you think about it some more, it starts to make a bit more sense, because people around the world using their browsers, using games, and more recently interacting with metaverses, they expect an incredibly good experience when they're retrieving files from storage providers, and they expect things to load almost instantly. If you think about how quickly you get results from the internet, it's actually mind-blowing that you can load a list of pages which when you do a Google search, for example, you can load a list of pages quicker than it takes for you to actually search your own computer for files. It's so optimized. And so people expect this great experience, and as such, content providers are happy to spend a lot of money on creating such a good experience for their clients. And that's why this retrieval space, these retrieval networks, there's actually such a big market. And I think what's super interesting here is actually in the Web3 space, it's more of an untapped market. We speak a lot about storage, but I think there's still lots of ground to be fought over in the retrieval space. So we're talking about retrievals today. That's essentially what I was getting at there. Now we're going to talk about what a retrieval market is. So these two words we use a lot in my work, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what we're talking about. So what is a retrieval market? To me, it's a setting or a place where individuals, entities, nodes can contribute their resources in order to provide data retrievals to people who are demanding that data, and trying to optimize the experience for people who are demanding the data. So that means we're looking at good performance, good reliability, and economic retrievals of data. Now, I think the CDN providers that I spoke about previously, Akamai, Cloudflare, CloudFront, etc., they operate in a retrieval market. And that's the sort of Web 2 retrieval market, as we'll refer to it. But in particular, in the Retrieval Market Working Group and at Protocol Labs, we focus on decentralized retrieval markets. And that adds a lot of extra interesting complexities. So the Filecoin retrieval market, as I'm saying, is a setting where we can see an emergence of these content delivery networks And the Filecoin retrieval market is the emergence of a decentralized content delivery network around the Filecoin storage network. But we could also speak about this a bit more generally and say we're looking into decentralized retrieval markets around content-addressed data. And we'll go into more detail about why the data has to be content-addressed in this decentralized setting. So yeah, when we zoom in a bit and think about it a bit more, like, okay, what actually are the building blocks of a decentralized retrieval market? We start to come up with these different topics we can look into. On the right-hand side here, we've got this research to development scale, this pipeline of how developed this particular topic is. So I've tried to match each one of these building blocks on the left-hand side onto this scale. And I'm just going to quickly rattle through them. So crypto economics, we need to find ways in which nodes are going to join a retrieval market, or they'll be incentivized to join the network because of the rewards they're going to get for providing a service. And we also have to think about making sure the crypto economics are aligned with the goals of the network. And the goals of the network here are to provide those fast retrievals. And it can often be quite challenging to completely align the crypto economics with the actual goals of a network. The second point is retrieval mining. So this is sort of a sub-branch of crypto economics and more of a research focus. But are there ways in which we can have block rewards where we can reward these retrieval providers based on the services they provide in sort of a probabilistic way, or like more of a lottery style approach? Payment channels. So again, we've got to keep reminding ourselves that this is a decentralized network. If I'm going to be serving a retrieval, I want to earn for it, and either that can happen from block rewards from a blockchain, or it could happen in payment channels that are managing off-chain payments, which could then be later resolved on an on-chain network, on-chain blockchain. Reputation systems. We're in a trustless setting, so I don't know who I'm talking to. So it'd be great for me to understand each node. Are they actually trustworthy? Have they been serving good retrievals for a long period of time? Is this someone I want to do business with? Indexing. So can I find data very quickly? Are there services in the network which are going to allow me to find data quickly? And then there's content indexing, where I could use search terms to try and find data just based on those words. So essentially Google search for Web3. We look at data transport and transfer protocols. So how can we improve BitSwap, which is the main protocol for IPFS, and GraphSync, the main protocol for Filecoin, and how can we also add other data transport and transfer protocols? For example, HTTP, which can allow us more access into browser retrievals, moving on to point 7, or perhaps other more interesting protocols like WebRTC. There's some research going into that at the moment, which we'll come to later. And then finally, network monitoring. Network monitoring, we want to understand how these networks are performing. We want to see where the bottlenecks are, where people are emerging to provide a retrieval service, and where perhaps there are gaps in the offering. Cool, so now I'm going to move on to the Filecoin retrieval market in particular, and just talk through the different parts of the Filecoin retrieval market so far. So in this diagram, on the left-hand side, we've got a retrieval client who is going to be trying to retrieve a file from a Filecoin storage provider, which is in green on the right-hand side. And we call this the primary retrieval market. The primary retrieval market means that this is a deal and a transfer that's happening against a Filecoin storage provider, rather than any sort of secondary caches or retrieval providers. And as of the time of Filecoin launch, this was the approach that the retrieval client would have to go through in order to make a retrieval. If it was a retrieval that they wanted to pay for, they would have to start off by setting up a payment channel, which is an on-chain transaction. They would then transfer vouchers to the storage provider in exchange for bytes in this optimistic fair exchange protocol. So the client would send one voucher in exchange for 1 byte. Then it would say, okay, this is working. I've built a little bit of trust in this storage provider, so I'm going to send a few more vouchers, and so let's say 2 vouchers for 2 bytes. And you build up more vouchers for more bytes until the end of the file. And the reason it's an optimistic exchange is because at any point the storage provider could decide not to send the bytes, and at that point the retrieval client has no way to sort of register a dispute. It just doesn't get those bytes, and so it's relying on sort of implicit trust in the storage provider to send back those bytes. Once the whole file has been sent, the storage provider can then redeem the vouchers that it's retrieved for some Filecoin, again, an on-chain transaction in the payment channel. Now, why are we using vouchers rather than just Filecoin transactions? The reason is we don't want to have to wait for an on-chain transaction every time we want to receive some bytes. We need this to be very, very quick. And so we've got this off-chain setting where we can exchange vouchers for bytes. In all of this, we've got quite a lot of requirements we're placing on the retrieval client. So it's not really, a browser couldn't really sit in this blue box because it wouldn't be able to make that on-chain transaction for a payment channel or do this graph sync style protocol to exchange vouchers for bytes. And so there's quite a lot of heavy requirements on the retrieval client. Another thing to mention is storage providers aren't really equipped to deal with lots and lots of retrievals. Like Web2 CDNs, they deal with DDoS attacks and also spikes in traffic. And storage providers aren't really equipped to deal with that. So a steady stream of traffic is okay, but not the sort of spikes we see in the internet today. So yeah, as I say, that was the last slide was how Filecoin launched. And now what we're starting to see emerge is what I've tried to capture in this diagram. So we have content publishers down in the bottom left who are now speaking to what I've called deal and distribution services. For example, Estuary. So they say to Estuary, we'd like to store this data and we'd also like it to be retrievable. And the deal and distribution service, for example, Estuary, makes storage deals with one or more storage providers, and then also allows an IPFS retrieval story through the IPFS gateway. So this is great. We've got some archival storage covered with Filecoin, and we've also got an IPFS retrieval story. However, I suppose it leaves a few things to be desired in terms of sort of the decentralization, the Web3-ness, and also the crypto economics of the system. What we'd really like to see is for the storage and the retrieval story to be linked, and so we can have a way that value can flow between those two parts of the architecture. If we think about the sort of Web 2 value flow, it would be from the content publishers to the website or web app providers, and then they would serve to those clients. And perhaps the clients would provide value back to the content publishers by buying things or interacting with marketplaces, that sort of thing. And we've got a similar sort of thing where that can happen here, where the content publishers are transferring tokens or value to the deal and distribution service, which then goes to storage providers. But it doesn't really link up to the IPFS story here. We've still got people providing IPFS nodes without sort of the incentive to do so, and the person who's providing the IPFS gateway is picking up the bill here to provide the retrievals. And then what we're starting to see emerge on top of the previous diagram are these content delivery networks, which are essentially cache missing to the IPFS gateway. So to mention a few, we've got NFT.storage gateway, which is racing IPFS gateways on a cache miss, and then is populating the cache with the content. We've got Meson Network, who's building a decentralized CDN, which cache misses to the IPFS gateway, and the Media Network, which is also cache missing to the IPFS gateway, but the actual CDN is more decentralized. I think this is really interesting because it's latching on to the current retrieval story, but we're still not connecting it back to the original storage story. So that takes us now on to the secondary retrieval market, which I've still got the content publishers down in the bottom left and the deal and distribution service, and they're still talking to the storage providers, but I've replaced the IPFS retrieval story with this ring of retrieval providers and also index providers. The idea here, and why it's a secondary retrieval market, is that the retrieval providers, so the primary retrieval market, if you remember, was talking to the storage providers and making deals and transfers with the green nodes in this network. The secondary retrieval market is where retrieval providers could talk to each other and make deals and retrievals with each other, and it sort of distances it from the storage providers. One of the roles of these retrieval providers, similar to the IPFS gateways, is we've now got a translation layer between the clients that we use every day, like browsers, game consoles, and as I say, metaverses coming soon, to the graph sync protocol and the ways that we can talk to storage providers. So we've got this sort of translation layer. We've also got this indexer provider coming into the architecture here. This is work that was recently carried out by the data systems team on the indexer node, and that can help to inform the retrieval provider how to make a quick retrieval from storage providers in the primary retrieval market. And we can also see now that the retrieval providers could then act and fulfill the same roles as Web2 CDNs. So they can start to handle traffic spikes and other sort of attacks on the sort of front line of the internet. Another thing to mention is this can now allow us to have much lower hardware requirements for someone to contribute to the network. To be a Filecoin storage provider, you have to have a pretty beefy node, and there's some barriers to entry in terms of the hardware you need to have. Whereas retrieval providers, if we can allow anyone to join with old devices or their current desktops and laptops, we can start to enable anyone to join the network and provide value to the network. So as I mentioned on the last slide, we've got these CDNs that are cache missing to the IPFS gateway. We've now got these, we're going to mention a few other networks which are emerging more towards this architecture. And I've written them down here in order of when they sort of started working in this space. We've got the MyL network, we've got Saturn, and we've got Titan. And we'll be hearing, as I say, from the Saturn team a bit later. I think also Titan is a moon of Saturn, which is interesting that we've got two Saturn-based planetary teams. I don't think MyL is related. I think it's to do with like something in your brain, but I'm not entirely sure where that name comes from. Okay, so I've tried to map out all of these different networks I've mentioned so far that are emerging in this space, quite crudely onto this Web 2 to Web 3 axis. So firstly, a disclaimer that I apologize if anyone who's watching live or here in person disagrees quite with the placement on this axis. But I think it sort of captures the point that there are trade-offs that you have to make in order to talk to the clients we use every day, like browsers, and that trade-offs that make you more Web 2 focused. And then there are teams like MyL who are working on the no trade-off approach where everything is pure Web 3, but it makes it, I guess, a little bit more difficult to integrate with everyday devices and to manage the network and apply the crypto-economic mechanisms which are starting to form. Okay, why do we even need a Web3 retrieval market? So I guess the first answer to that question is just because it's Web3. If we have a Web3 stack and it then has a Web2 part of it, then for a lot of people that just kind of breaks the whole chain and you're only as good as your weakest link. But the Web2 offerings like Cloudflare, etc., they offer a pretty good service. For very small files, it's very performant, it's reliable, and it's pretty economic. So why is it we want to reach for a Web3 CDN and delivery network? So I've got at the top these features or requirements. And these are things I think that any Web3 CDN has really got to focus on. And I believe from these features and requirements, we get the value propositions below. So firstly, it's got to be permissionless. Anyone can join. Anyone can start to contribute to the network. And that sort of also links to this lightweight devices can join. If lightweight devices can join, then anyone can join. And you allow the network to be sort of market oriented and just anyone can be part of it. And I think that's really important. It's got to be content addressed though, because if you're retrieving files from a node that you don't trust or has just joined the network, if you ask for a very large file and they just return you a tiny file or just the wrong file, you need a way to sort of check that what you've got back from them is what you asked for. And that's where we lean on content addressing, as we do so often in IPFS and Filecoin networks. It just really wouldn't work with location addressing because you just wouldn't know what you get back is the right thing. And that also links back to here. One of the key things that makes one of these networks more towards the Web3 scale is the verifiability. When we're fetching things from the IPFS gateway as a raw file, we're not verifying that it's the right file. We're implicitly trusting those gateways to give us back the right file. And as we move more towards the Web3 end of the axis, we're not so much trusting those nodes, and we're having to verify those files. But that means that, let's say we're in a browser, that's an added thing the browser's got to do, which it doesn't normally do to the files it retrieves. And crypto incentivized. There have been peer-to-peer networks for retrieval in the past that have had great success. There have been some now which are starting to launch with crypto incentives. I think that's an important part of creating an economy which will thrive and continue for a long time. And the value propositions this gives us, as I've already sort of mentioned, conflating it a bit with the requirements, is the low barrier to entry. Anyone can join. I then think one of the 0 to 1 innovations of the Web3 CDN is that users can earn. In the Web2 context, it's quite an asymmetric relationship. We just retrieve from these CDNs, we get the files, but if they go down, then we can't retrieve. And there's nothing we can really do with those files once we've retrieved them, apart from just view them. But in this Web3 context, you could retrieve, and then you could start to earn by sharing what you've retrieved with others. So it's enabling users to earn by being more symmetric and more powerful nodes in the network. We can get multi-peer retrievals, something which the BitTorrent networks did previously, where we can start to, rather than just always fetch from that one point of presence, we can start to get parts of the file from different nodes. And that links to sort of network resilience a point further down. If nodes start to go offline, we can start to fetch files from different parts of the network. Deduplication, because it's content addressed, we don't have to store the same file again and again just for different content publishers. We know that it's just a particular block or a particular file. We can store it once, even if many different clients want to retrieve it, or many different content publishers want to store that same file. So it's just kind of a nice optimization. And then it's market-oriented. If we start to see spikes in particular parts of the world, or even in sparsely populated regions that are far away from current points of presence in Web2 cloud providers, then we can start to see people spin up their nodes there and provide a good retrieval service. And finally, it's economic for large files. So I would say that's an area which there's a lot of untapped potential, is videos, large NFT media files, metaverse files. We can start to see really interesting solutions for how we can quickly and performantly get those files into each peer in the network. Okay, and finally, I'm going to talk about the Retrieval Market Working Group. So I brought back in the different building blocks of topics that we touched on earlier, which we're looking at as part of a retrieval market. And going through some of the teams that we've got working in this space, and I'll just very quickly introduce what they're working on. First, and also I'd like to apologize here if I haven't got a particular team down. Just apologize in advance. I think I've covered most of them though. Magmo, this is a team which is part of Consensus, and they're working on multi-hop payment channels. So how can we, rather than having a payment channel in between each retrieval provider and storage provider, can we have sort of a payment channel manager or payment channel provider that can start to match retrieval providers with storage providers and allow this to happen in a performant way? Top right, we have Ken Labs, who are working on reputation systems, in particular this metadata service called Pando, and they're just about to start the second phase of that. We have Mael, who are working, as I've mentioned already, on a retrieval network. They've also done some great stuff with browser retrievals and looking into that, and also looking at graph sync and how we can write it in different languages and make improvements. So that folds into sort of data transport and transfer protocols. ChainSafe, they've been working on content indexing. So as I mentioned, how do we build a Google search, but for Web3? And they've also been looking at WebRTC data transport. Leeway Hertz, they've been working on network monitoring. How can we figure out how fast it is time to first byte or time to last byte across all of these different retrieval networks and find ways we can improve the networks. And finally, New Web Group, who are building the Titan network, where they want to leverage all of the unused bandwidth in home networks in order to create a thriving retrieval network. And we have currently 10 plus grants in progress, lots of teams working in this space. And if there's any other teams listening or interested, just get in touch and we can start working on grant proposals. So yeah, get involved. If anyone's interested in learning more, head to retrieval.market or scan this QR code here to get there on your phone, or just reach out on Filecoin Slack, Retrieval Market channel, and we can speak more about it. So yeah, many thanks. And I think there are 5 minutes for any questions, either from the stream, if you write it on the YouTube channel, or from us here in person. One question from YouTube? No. Ben, did you have one? Hang on.
you had a slide where you explained primary and secondary retrieval markets. What exactly is the difference there? Like, how do they differ? And
Yeah, let me just go back to the slides. Okay, so actually I think it's better to describe it on this slide. Can you see my mouse on there? Yes. So the primary retrieval market is where we can fetch stuff, retrieve stuff from the Filecoin storage providers. That's like the first layer of retrieval. But the secondary retrieval market is when we can fetch things, retrieve things from these sort of secondary cache layers. So that's the retrieval provider talking to a retrieval provider. And that's where we have the secondary market. Does that make sense? Cool. Any other questions? Nice. In which case, I'll wrap up this talk.